Hello, I'm Dr. Manuel G. Saldivar. I'm a cognitive psychologist and a university faculty member. On this channel, I focus on ideas and concepts that will help you become more successful as a college student. Please join me for today's episode. When college students think about effective learning, they focus on the most obvious part of the process, which is going through some method or methods of studying in order to help you remember information that you need for your classes and hopefully for your future career and profession. Certainly, you want to make sure that you're using approaches to studying that help you remember things, but it's also vital to include a third step. You want to make sure that you're able to comprehend the information that you're learning. Otherwise, you're not really learning, you're just memorizing. If you've been following this YouTube channel, you know that I've previously discussed the process of information processing, the information processing system, which is the way in which the human brain remembers stuff. This chart should look familiar. I'm not going to review it here. You can go to episode 8 in this series in order to get a detailed description of how this information processing system works. But the main point I want to make here, and the reason why I'm referring to it, is because when we remember things, we're going to have better recall, a better ability to retrieve that information from our long-term memory if we go through a process of encoding, which means giving meaning, giving significance to information. If you're just memorizing information without really understanding what you're doing, you're basically wasting your time. All of us, including myself, have had examples like this. It might be a particular class you're not that interested in. You maybe think this class or this subject is not that important for your future. Maybe you do like the subject, but you don't like the particular professor who's teaching it. Or there's some other reason why that particular class, that particular set of material is not engaging for you. And so what often ends up happening is you go through a process where you're memorized, which means you're cramming it into your short-term memory. The information will reside there for some amount of time, typically until you take an exam, write a paper, do some other thing that's required by the class. But then as soon as you've taken that test or that quiz, as soon as you've written the paper, that information just disappears from your short-term memory. It's almost as if you never learned it in the first place. This is because you have been memorizing without understanding. You haven't been ascribing any significance to that information. Now, I've mentioned in previous videos, and I guess I'll repeat myself here, many students will say things like, well, I want to be an accountant. Why should I have to worry about fine arts? I want to be an engineer. Why should I worry about my fine arts classes? Although those questions are legitimate, and I think there are legitimate answers, setting all that kind of thing aside, certainly if you are cramming, if you're focusing on memorization instead of really developing an understanding, not in courses that are elective, not in courses that you may feel are not central to your career, but are actually part of your career path. Information material that you really need to master in order to become an accountant or an engineer or whatever your career path is. Then, of course, you're setting yourself up for problems on the road because you will have to compete for jobs against people who are learning, who are not just memorizing, who are really trying to develop deeper understanding of concepts. So it's to your benefit, not just in the sense of grades, not just in the sense of pleasing your professors or your family or whoever, but for yourself, for your own benefit, for your own future. You want to have a real understanding of ideas instead of just memorizing them. Now, there's not one right way to approach studying and note-taking. Again, I've discussed in prior videos when we've talked about things like human memory, that because everyone is unique to some degree, there are some techniques that might work for some people that might not work for others, but I would encourage you to experiment. Don't just rely on one technique to studying, to note-taking that you may have been using for many years. A lot of times students will say things like, well, this approach or that approach won't really work for me. I've always done it this way. That may be true, but sometimes students are putting things backwards. Because they've always done something a certain way, like studying, taking notes, it's easy to fool yourself into thinking that that's the only possible way you can study. not because it's actually the most effective, but it's just something that's familiar, that's comfortable, that's easy, so you don't want to change. I'm not going to go into detail about different approaches here. You can easily search YouTube for plenty of advice on various study methods, but I would again encourage you to experiment. Maybe outlining might work for you. Maybe mnemonics might work better. Maybe flashcards. Maybe creating mind maps. Maybe creating matrices. Matrices is just a plural of matrix. A chart or a table that compares information. In some cases, you may actually find that using a combination of these approaches together work best. In some classes, for some subjects, you may find that certain approaches work better than for others. In my own experience, for example, I know when I've studied foreign languages, flashcards with vocabulary words or with different conjugations or declensions of words, sometimes a flashcard will help. In a language class where you're trying to memorize a lot of vocabulary, in a history class where you're trying to tie together a lot of concepts, maybe a matrix or an outline might be the best approach. So there's not one right way either for a particular person nor for a particular subject. However, if you do want some more information about visual note-taking in general, I'd encourage you to look at episode 7 of my video series, and the link to this and all my other videos is found in the description box below. Before I close, though, I do want to give you some concrete advice. So I'm going to close with 4 best practices for studying that should work for you regardless of what particular note-taking system you choose to employ or even what particular course you are trying to prepare for. Sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for notifications. First, you want to make sure that you're giving your studying what we call focused attention. This means minimizing or eliminating any distractions that could cause you to split your attention between different things. I've encountered many students who will say things like, oh, I'm good at multitasking, or I study better when I have music in the background, or the TV playing in the background, or some other situation. And although I believe those students sincerely believe what they're telling me, I don't think they're not trying to tell me the truth. I also think that they may be fooling themselves a little bit. A lot of times we may be in an environment or we may have personal preferences where we like having activity around us or we're more comfortable having background noise. So we tell ourselves that it's okay, it doesn't affect our studying. But unless you've really worked to eliminate those kinds of distractions and force yourself to really focus your attention on studying, you really won't know, right? You're just making assumptions. So at least once, if you do tend to have music blaring in the background or whatever, try turning the music off, try putting your phone away, to not engage with social media or not respond to messages just for a while. See if that helps you with your study session. If it is helpful, then you might consider using that same approach more frequently in the future. Part of focusing your attention as well, by the way, another important aspect of this is to be organized. So if you're going to spend a certain amount of time studying for a chemistry test, let's say you have in a week and a half, be sure you have all the materials that you need, your textbook, maybe your laptop, so you can search for information on the internet or refer to a course Blackboard site or whatever else you might need. Put all those materials in an organized fashion together on your desk or your table so you have that all available for you, so you're not having to start studying and then stop because you realize you need to look something up on the internet, so you've got to get your laptop, or you develop a question and you want to email your professor, or you have a separate reading that wasn't in the textbook, so you've got to go look for that PDF. If you organize yourself beforehand, then you can really focus your attention and have a more productive study session. A technique that has been found by research to be very, very helpful with students is self-testing. So instead of just reading, rereading, for example, stop periodically after you've read and engage with some ideas and test yourself. Literally ask yourself questions. You can create questions easily. One simple technique is just to look at chapter headings. So if you're reading a chapter about the U.S. Civil War for your history class, I'll bet one of the chapter headings will be something like causes of the Civil War. So a good question you might ask yourself is, what are causes of the U.S. Civil War? What are the top 3 or top 2 or some number? And then after you've read that section, test yourself. See if you can answer that question. If it's material you've already read or been reading, then you should at least begin to be able to answer that question. But because the way our memory works, and again, I refer you to my video 8 on how we remember stuff for more information about that. But because the way that the human brain works, pausing periodically and asking yourself questions that you then have to answer, testing yourself, is a much more effective way of creating permanent memories, creating true understanding, than just rereading without any kind of break or pause. It's also important, and again, there's lots of research that supports this, to study in what I call bite-sized pieces. If you had 3 students, I'm going to call them Anna, Diego, and Lucy, who each had 4 hours that they could dedicate to studying for a particular test that's going to come next week. If Anna spent all her 4 hours in one big block, and Diego spent his 4 hours in 2 2-hour blocks, and Lucy spent her 4 hours in 4 1-hour blocks, statistically, research suggests that Lucy should have the highest grade. Because again, the way our memory works, if we try and cram too much information at one time, especially if that one time is very last minute, like say the night before an exam, your working memory will get overwhelmed and it'll become very difficult to move information, to encode information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. So here's one example where instead of waiting until the night before, if you can build into your schedule, if you can plan ahead and have at least a couple of nights, ideally as many days as possible, where you start studying and end up with a large number or a frequent set of study sessions that may be relatively short, but you're spreading out that studying over time, as opposed to trying to do it all at one go, you're going to tend to have better outcomes. You'll remember things more clearly for a longer time and have a deeper understanding because of this bite-sized approach, as opposed to trying to cram everything in at one go in one big block of time. Again, episode 8 in this series can give you more information about this particular approach. And then finally, and this is, I admit, probably the most difficult bit of advice, although it is based in research. A lot of times you have to develop some experience with a particular subject in order to really be able to carry this out. But it's important to apply and find meaning in the stuff that you're learning. If you go through the motions, if you feel like, okay, to go back to my prior examples, I'm an accounting major, I don't really care about this history class, or I'm an engineering major, I don't really care about this fine arts class, then number one, you're creating what we call in psychology a self-fulfilling prophecy, where you're not going to learn very well because you're already kind of closing the door to learning. But you're also telling your brain, this stuff doesn't matter. It's unimportant. Of course it's going to be difficult for you to remember. If you go in telling yourself this information is useless, then your brain is not going to waste time, not going to make a lot of effort to try and remember it. But if you can find some meaning, even if it's a little bit of a stretch, even if it's a little bit tenuous, if you can tell yourself, okay, I'm an accounting major, I have to take this history class, it's not my favorite class, I may not be super happy that I'm in here, but it's a class I have to take, and here are examples of meaning, it helps me complete my bachelor's degree, maybe it'll help me learn a little bit about the world around me, maybe I'll pick up a few things, maybe not every class, but I'll pick up a few things taking this class that will help me in some way in my career, some useful information. Just making an effort to try and find meaning, to try and answer in your own mind at least the question, so what? Why am I in this class? How is this information, how is this course content helpful or useful to me? That small step can end up helping you encode more efficiently, and so that information ends up moving from your short-term memory to your long-term memory, which means you're able to recall it over time. Now, just to remind us of the main discussion for today on this topic of studying and memory, you're not really learning if you're not both remembering and comprehending the information that you are putting into your memory. So being able to spit out dates, facts, memorized points won't get you as far as being able to really understand what it is you're talking about. As I've said in previous videos, remember someday you'll be competing for jobs against other people with a similar background. And I guarantee you, the students who really understand what they're talking about, who go in to interview for that job as a nurse or an accountant or an engineer or whatever, they're going to have the advantage because employers will pick up on the fact that these folks really understand what they're talking about. They know how to do accounting. They know how to do engineering. They know how to do nursing or whatever the profession is. They're not just going through the motions. They're not just mouthing vocabulary terms. They really know what they're talking about. Cramming will not lead to long-term learning because you'll just overwhelm your short-term memory. You won't really move information into long-term memory. So avoid cramming at all costs. Not all study methods are equal, but you want to look around and try and find the one that makes the most sense for you, not just for you as a person in general, but some approaches to studying, to note-taking, may make more sense for you in certain courses, whereas other approaches may make sense for other courses. And we talked about best practices for studying focused attention, testing yourself, studying in bite-sized pieces, and finding meaning in what it is you're learning. I hope you found these ideas helpful as you focus on improving your approach to studying and learning going forward. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll click on the thumbs up icon below. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon. YouTube will notify you of future videos added to this channel. Remember, college success is challenging, it takes work and effort, but it is certainly within your grasp. Good luck.